Here's my friend John McWhorter on CNN's Don Lemon Tonight. So, without any further ado,
President Trump doubling down today on his criticism of NFL players who kneeled during the national anthem, saying he is ashamed of them, calling their actions disrespectful and disgraceful. Joining me now is John McWhorter, professor of linguistics at Columbia University and the author of Words on the Move. John, good to see you. When you listen to the president, he uses words like ashamed about the NFL players taking a knee, and then he goes on to describe them as disrespectful, and then he brings up the Walter Reed soldiers, almost like a verbal prop, right? Is he deliberately trying to change what the meaning of what the players say the protests are about? Why is he doing that?
Well, you know, Don, I always say that we have to be careful when we talk about deliberateness with Trump, because he's a very, shall we say, visceral and immediate thinker. I find it very hard to think of him as cynical, because that implies that he's clever, which he's not. We're dealing with a different kind of animal. But what strikes me is that this idea that it's your country and a kind of a red meat hot dog patriotism above all, there's nothing else to say, the sort of thing where people say, well, all I know is, and you're supposed to just bow down. What that is a very reflexive kind of thinking, which implies that beyond a certain point, there are no questions to be asked. And so he'll talk about things like the soldiers. He'll use words like veteran. And if you ask me, it's primitive, it's reflexive, it has an almost 1940s kind of air about it that reminds me, oddly enough, and I'm not one of these people who's going to call Trump a fascist, because once again, that requires a certain kind of thinking and deliberateness that I don't see in him. But this reminds me of Nazis. It's like Nazis talking about their loyalty to the Staat, or talk about our problem right now with North Korea. What does the first letter in his middle name stand for? I genuinely don't know, but it seems this week that it would be for Jong. He's acting like Kim Jong-un. This idea that you should be loyal to the state and there's no question, and if that's not what you do, then you will suffer a penalty. He's primitive.
Yeah. Well, he says that the NFL comments are not about race, but when 70% of African American, the league is 70% of African American. I want to play these clips and then I want to get your take on that use of the language.
You had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did.
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a bitch off the field right now, out, he's fired. He's fired!
So he calls white supremacists very fine people, and then he calls the NFL players, the black athletes, sons of bitches. Dissect those words for me.
Very simple. He is genuine in expressing his feelings about aforesaid sons of bitches. It's visceral. He really feels it. He yells fired. Then he grunts fired, as if, you know, something arose within him. He means it. Whereas he had to be backed against a wall practically at gunpoint to say something about the raving bigots in Charlottesville. And when he said it, he read it from a teleprompter, and he clearly, I would say that he didn't mean it, but I would be told that how do I know? Well, let's just try this. He certainly wasn't as passionate about it. So, yes, there is a racial angle. And so if somebody protests taking down a statue of somebody who fought to keep yours and my ancestors enslaved,
under the flag that he says not to disrespect.
As far as he's concerned, then, well, there are some bad apples, but there are some other ones, and please leave me alone. But if somebody kneels in protest of police brutality while somebody is playing a very difficult to sing and play song, which is our national anthem, suddenly they are sons of bitches. And this is a president who's saying this in front of the nation, not just, you know, over a cigar in the Oval Office when he doesn't know that anybody's ever going to be listening to the tapes. But those people are sons of bitches. So, as you know, Don, I am not crazy about walking around calling every second person in the world a racist. I am not the Ta-Nehisi Coates type. But in this case, let's call it the intersectionality. Race definitely plays a part.
Okay. Let's talk about his tweet now. He's clearly watching the football coverage, because here's what he tweeted, different responses from the players and teams, and he tweeted this. He said, tweet great solidarity for our national anthem and for our country. Standing with locked arms is good. Kneeling is not acceptable. Bad ratings. What's he doing? Is he co-opting the message of the protesters?
It's very interesting. He actually thinks that it's okay to think about the people who support him in this view. What that's about is that there are things that are natural, that are the way things tend to pull, where it's the job of somebody in moral authority to teach us to move away from it with our frontal cortex as much as we can. He understands moving away from the natural when it comes to, for example, his hair. So what is that yellow hair? The idea is to work against what is natural. But when it comes to something like that, yes, there are people around the country who are being Andrew Dice Clays and saying, yeah, he's right. That's right. You're supposed to support the flag. Yeah. There are plenty of people like that. It's probably half of the country. But frankly, that is a half of the country that could be instructed into a slightly more sophisticated view of what patriotism is. When you love something, sometimes you scold it. Don't most of us who are raising children, which is most human beings, understand that? That's something that can be difficult to understand at first. All of us tear up a little bit at ba-ba-da-da-da-da.
Right.
But a country can be imperfect. Now, he's supposed to lead us in that, and he doesn't.
So last night, listen, the Cowboys tried to bridge the walk a very fine line. They tried to bridge this gap, and they took a knee before the national anthem, before standing for the national anthem. And then the president tweeted this. He said, the booing at the NFL football game last night, when the entire Dallas team dropped to its knee, was the loudest I've ever heard. Great anger. Why is he claiming some victory from that? I didn't notice it, but I don't know if it's true or false.
Well, he's going to listen for that victory because, of course, there are people who are going to agree with him because most people aren't president. They're not supposed to be our moral leaders. But because he is a narcissist, because basically the country is being run by somebody seven, what's important to him is whether or not he was proven right, rather than whether or not we can analyze what's going on and look for what's more complex. I mean, honestly, the relationship between black men and the cops is the main thing that keeps us from getting past race in this country. It's not about reparations. It's not about cultural appropriation. It's about the cops. Now, opinions vary on that issue. It is frustratingly complex. But if this is all that our president has on it, then we're really in trouble.
I want to read this is an opinion piece from Michael Garcon on the Washington Post. He said, stop and consider. This is a sobering historical moment. America has a racial demagogue as president. We play hail to this chief. We stand when he enters the room. We continue to honor an office he so often dishonors. It is appropriate, but increasingly difficult. Are his words and actions diminishing the presidency, you think?
Oh, very much so.
Do you agree with Garcon?
Oh, I wouldn't put it in such colorful language, partly because, once again, racial demagogue implies more active, deliberate thought than I see in a president who never surprises me and whose actions are always based on the lowest common denominator, on the instincts of an alligator in the guise of a human. And there I am using colorful language. But yes, we are being supervised by a person who is about as advanced on race as a less professorial Woodrow Wilson. It's tragic. I hope that we only have another 3 years of it.
John McWhorter, thank you.
Thank you, John.
Next time, say how you really feel.
That's John. Boy, oh boy, folks. John McWhorter used to live here in Oakland, actually on Van Buren, and was an alley denizen. That's right. A regular for a time at the alley, 3325 Grand Avenue, where Ron Dibble will play at the piano, and now others do. But I digress. Great takedown by John McWhorter, who lives in New York and is with Columbia and the Manhattan Institute. More pointedly, what's happening, not just, and it's reflected in the words that John McWhorter shared with us and others this week, and my vlog calling for Trump to resign, is that he has sullied the office of the President of the United States. Not just this week. This has gone on during the campaign. We thought for a time, oh, he'll settle in and change. He has not done that. He has basically acted as much as a child who hasn't been potty trained would act if you told them to sit down on a couch and not wet themselves if you hadn't trained them on what wetting themselves was and how to avoid it. That's exactly how Donald Trump acts with respect to the presidency. He doesn't think in terms of having a, a governor for his speech. He doesn't think in terms of governing. He still thinks in simplistic terms of campaigning. And it may very well be, as John shed a line on that I haven't considered, Trump is not intellectually equipped to be president. He's intellectually equipped to be a deal maker, but he's not intellectually equipped for the complexities that the office calls for, and they just may very well be beyond him. So rather than dig in and get involved with the very thorny and time consuming and detailed activity of policy formation, he simply goes out and causes a stir, while his inexperienced policy advisors go to work on coming up with the next idea that's going to fail in Congress or be killed in the courts. This is not the kind of situation America deserves to be in at all.